Deep in the arid wastes of Afghanistan, where the sun beats down mercilessly and shadows offer the only respite from the heat, there exists a legend. A ghost sniper who moves without sound, strikes without warning, and vanishes before anyone can comprehend what happened. Soviet forces occupying the region during the 1980s knew her by a single name, Tixi, the Quiet One. But this phantom warrior's story begins not in the deserts of Central Asia, but in the sterile corridors of a hospital in Cyprus, where flames would consume her flesh and destiny would remake her into something beyond human comprehension. The tale of Quiet is one of transformation, loyalty, and sacrifice. It's a narrative woven through with the threads of betrayal and redemption, of a weapon designed to kill becoming a guardian willing to die. To understand Quiet, we must understand the world that forged her, the powers that shaped her, and the choices that defined her. This is the complete story of one of Metal Gear Solid 5's most enigmatic characters, from her first breath of fire to her final words, carried away by desert winds. Before we can truly comprehend Quiet's origins, we need to understand the organization that created her as an instrument of death. XOF was Cypher's covert strike force, an elite military unit that operated in the shadows of the already secretive intelligence agency. Where Cypher pulled strings from the darkness, XOF was the blade that cut through any obstacle standing in their way. This wasn't just another paramilitary group. XOF represented the pinnacle of clandestine operations, soldiers trained not just to complete missions, but to erase all evidence they ever existed. The unit's very name carried symbolic weight. XOF was the mirror image of FOX, the legendary Special Forces unit that Big Boss himself once commanded. Where FOX represented one approach to warfare, XOF embodied its twisted reflection. Under normal circumstances, XOF answered directly to Cypher, serving as the enforcement arm for an organization dedicated to controlling information and shaping world events from behind closed doors. But by the early 1980s, something had changed within the power structure. Command of XOF had fallen to a man known only as Skullface, a figure whose scarred visage told stories of unspeakable suffering and whose ambitions reached far beyond simple obedience to Cypher's directives. Skullface had his own agenda, his own vendetta against the world, and he wielded XOF like a scalpel, cutting away at the foundations of the very organization he supposedly served. His plan was audacious and terrifying in its scope. He intended to use weaponized parasites to erase the English language from existence, striking at what he saw as the tools of cultural imperialism that had destroyed his own identity. Within this context, every XOF operative served a specific purpose in Skullface's grand design. They weren't just soldiers, they were pieces on a chessboard, each one positioned to execute a plan decades in the making. The unit's operatives underwent intensive training that went beyond conventional special forces preparation. They learned to move through hostile territory without leaving traces. They mastered the art of infiltration and assassination. Most importantly, they learned absolute obedience to Skullface's commands, even when those commands contradicted Cypher's interests. XOF's operational doctrine emphasized total deniability. When XOF soldiers deployed to an area, they removed all identifying patches and insignia. They spoke in coded phrases. They left no survivors who might identify them. This methodology had proven devastatingly effective during the attack on Mother Base 9 years earlier, when XOF forces disguised themselves as United Nations inspectors to infiltrate Big Boss's mercenary haven and destroy it from within. That operation had killed hundreds and left Big Boss in a coma that would last nearly a decade. The unit attracted a specific type of soldier. These weren't patriots serving their country or mercenaries working for the highest bidder. XOF operatives were true believers in Skullface's vision, men and women who shared his rage against the systems that dominated the modern world. They saw themselves not as terrorists, but as liberators, working to free humanity from the linguistic tyranny that Skullface had identified as the root of cultural oppression. This ideological commitment made them more dangerous than conventional soldiers. They weren't fighting for money or glory. They were fighting for what they believed was the future of human civilization itself. Among these elite operatives, certain individuals stood out as exceptional even by XOF's demanding standards. The Parasite Unit, enhanced with biological weapons that granted them superhuman abilities, represented the cutting edge of Skullface's research into weaponized organisms. The Man on Fire, a supernatural entity bound to XOF's operations through the psychic powers of a child known as Tretije Rebenok, served as a weapon of pure destruction. And then there was Quiet, an assassin whose skills and abilities would eventually surpass even these remarkable individuals. What made XOF particularly formidable was its integration of conventional military tactics with experimental technologies. Skullface had access to Code Talker's research into vocal cord parasites, organisms that could target specific languages and kill anyone who spoke them. He commanded the development of Sahelanthropus, an advanced bipedal weapons platform decades ahead of its time. He controlled the Parasite Unit, super soldiers whose bodies had been modified to produce abilities that seemed to defy natural law. All of these assets served his ultimate goal of reshaping the world by destroying the English language, and Quiet would become one of the most crucial pieces in this elaborate plan. The organization's methodology reflected Skullface's own traumatic history. As a child, he had lost his language, his culture, and his identity to the forces of European imperialism. The boarding schools that attempted to civilize colonized peoples, the industrial complexes that exploited native populations, the wars that destroyed traditional ways of life. All of these had left their marks on Skullface, both literally and figuratively. His scarred face was a constant reminder of the fire that had consumed his world, and XOF was his instrument for bringing that same conflagration to the systems he blamed for his suffering. Every mission XOF undertook in the 1980s carried Skullface's personal stamp. Whether deploying vocal cord parasites to wipe out villages in Afghanistan and Africa, or hunting down Big Boss to prevent him from interfering with the master plan, XOF operations combined ruthless efficiency with an almost theatrical sense of symbolism. Skullface wanted his enemies to know they had been defeated by him, even if they never learned his name. This contradiction, seeking credit while maintaining anonymity, would eventually contribute to his downfall. But in the early spring of 1984, XOF remained at the height of its power. Into this crucible of ideological warfare and cutting-edge military technology stepped Quiet, an operative whose skills had earned her a position among XOF's most elite assets. She took orders directly from Skullface himself, a privilege reserved only for those operatives he trusted most. Her assignment on March 11, 1984, would seem straightforward on the surface. Infiltrate a British military hospital in Cyprus, eliminate a specific patient, leave no witnesses, but this mission would prove to be anything but routine, and its consequences would ripple through the remainder of Skullface's campaign and beyond. March 11, 1984, began like any other day at Dhekelia SBA Memorial Hospital in Cyprus. Medical staff moved through their routines with professional efficiency. Patients recovered from their various ailments in quiet rooms. Security maintained its vigilant but unobtrusive presence. None of them knew that sleeping in one of those quiet rooms was a man who would change the course of history, a comatose patient who had spent 9 years in a vegetative state following catastrophic injuries sustained during an attack on his military base. None of them knew that XOF had learned of this patient's location. And none of them could have imagined the hell that was about to be unleashed within those sterile corridors. Big Boss, the legendary soldier whose exploits had made him a living myth, lay unconscious in a hospital bed, unaware that this would be the day he finally awakened. But he wasn't the only occupant of that room. In the adjacent bed lay another patient, a man who called himself Ishmael, whose bandaged face concealed his identity, even as his alert eyes suggested he was far more aware of his surroundings than anyone realized. These two men, one comatose and one mysteriously awake, shared a room that would soon become ground zero for one of the most brazen assassination attempts in covert operations history. Quiet received her orders directly from Skullface. The mission parameters were clear and brutally simple. Big Boss had survived the attack on Mother Base 9 years earlier, though he had spent the subsequent years in a coma. Intelligence suggested he was about to wake up. Skullface couldn't allow that to happen. Big Boss represented too great a threat to his plans, a wild card whose legendary combat abilities and charismatic leadership could potentially derail everything XOF had worked toward. The solution was straightforward: eliminate Big Boss while he remained vulnerable, before he could recover and rebuild his forces. As an elite XOF assassin, Quiet possessed skills that made her ideal for this assignment. Her marksmanship was extraordinary, capable of making shots that would seem impossible to conventional snipers. Her infiltration abilities allowed her to move through secure areas without triggering alarms. Most importantly, she had the cold professionalism necessary to kill an unconscious man without hesitation. In the brutal calculus of covert warfare, this wasn't murder. It was a military necessity, removing a piece from the board before it could threaten XOF's strategic position. The hospital raid began with XOF forces deploying to the facility under cover of darkness. Their arrival coincided with another attack, one that XOF hadn't anticipated. The Man on Fire and Tretai Rebenok, drawn by their own supernatural imperative to destroy Big Boss, had also converged on the hospital. This created chaos that actually served Quiet's purposes well, with the hospital staff scrambling to respond to the burning apparition tearing through their facility. Security focused on containing that immediate threat rather than watching for a lone infiltrator. Quiet moved through the hospital with practiced ease. She had studied the layout, memorized the patrol patterns, identified the optimal entry and exit routes. Her target was in room 203, a private room on the second floor where Big Boss recovered under medical supervision. She eliminated the nurse and doctor attending to him with quick, efficient shots from her suppressed handgun. No hesitation, no remorse. These were acceptable casualties in a war they didn't even know they were part of. With the medical staff dead, she approached Big Boss's bed, weapon raised, ready to complete her mission. But something unexpected happened. Quiet reported back to her superiors via radio, informing them that she hadn't killed the target yet. The reason she gave was simple but problematic. The man in the next bed, this mysterious Ishmael, had seen her face. Quiet's identity had been compromised. In XOF operations, maintaining anonymity was paramount. If witnesses existed who could identify operatives, future missions became exponentially more dangerous. Quiet's training demanded she eliminate this witness before proceeding with her primary objective. She turned her attention to the man in the adjacent bed, this patient whose watchful eyes suggested he was far more than he appeared. Later, the world would learn that Ishmael was actually the real Big Boss, and that the man Quiet had been sent to kill was a body double created through hypnotic suggestion and reconstructive surgery. But in that moment, Quiet knew only that this witness represented a complication to her mission, one she needed to resolve before completing her assignment. What happened next occurred with startling speed. As Quiet raised her weapon toward the comatose target, actually Venom Snake, the medic who would become Big Boss's phantom, Ishmael launched himself from his own bed with surprising agility for someone who had supposedly been hospitalized. He crashed into Quiet mere seconds before she could pull the trigger, disrupting her aim and sending both of them sprawling. The collision was violent and unexpected, and it saved Venom Snake's life even as it threw the hospital room into chaos. Quiet and Ishmael struggled in close-quarters combat, each trying to gain the advantage. Despite his weakened state from prolonged hospitalization, Ishmael fought with the skill of a seasoned Special Forces operative, which made sense given his true identity as Big Boss. Quiet's training served her well, allowing her to hold her own against this unexpected resistance. The fight moved around the room, knocking over medical equipment and destroying furniture. Neither combatant held back, both understanding that this was a life-or-death struggle with no room for mercy or hesitation. During the struggle, Ishmael managed to fight Quiet off temporarily and attempted to rouse Venom Snake from his coma. The man who would become Big Boss's phantom began to stir, consciousness slowly returning after 9 years of unconscious existence. But Quiet recovered quickly from Ishmael's attack and renewed her assault, this time attempting to strangle the awakening target with her bare hands. Her fingers closed around Venom Snake's throat, applying pressure with lethal intent. For a moment, it seemed the mission might still succeed despite the complications. Then Ishmael seized a bottle of medical-grade ethanol from a nearby supply cart. He swung it with desperate force, shattering the glass against Quiet and dousing her in the highly flammable liquid. The ethanol soaked through her clothing, covering her skin, seeping into her hair. In that instant, Quiet must have realized what was about to happen, but she had no time to react before Ishmael produced a lighter. Though how an unconscious patient had acquired such an item remained one of the many mysteries surrounding his true identity, and ignited the chemical-soaked assassin. Flames erupted across Quiet's body with terrifying intensity. Medical-grade ethanol burns with particular ferocity, and the fire consumed her clothing, her skin, her hair. She screamed, a sound that cut through the chaos of the hospital raid like a knife. The pain must have been excruciating beyond description, nerve endings firing as flesh began to char and bubble. Quiet's professional composure shattered under the onslaught of agony as her body became a living torch. In her burning state, Quiet did the only thing she could do. She ran toward the window, her survival instinct overriding all tactical considerations. Glass shattered as she threw herself through it, preferring the risk of the fall to the certainty of burning to death in that hospital room. She plummeted from the second floor, flames still consuming her body as she fell. The impact with the ground outside the hospital knocked the breath from her lungs, but somehow, impossibly, Quiet survived both the fire and the fall. She lay there on the concrete, flames still flickering across her ravaged body, consciousness fading as shock began to set in. Her mission had failed. Her identity had been compromised. Her body had been destroyed. Any normal person would have died there, succumbing to the catastrophic burns covering most of their body. But Quiet's story didn't end in that moment. In fact, it was just beginning, because Skullface had contingency plans even for scenarios as catastrophic as this one. XOF forces extracted Quiet from the hospital grounds, pulling her broken body from the aftermath of the raid, even as the man on fire continued his supernatural rampage through the facility. They rushed her to a secure location where Skullface's most secret research was being conducted. There, with Quiet hovering on the edge of death, Skullface made a decision that would transform his failed assassin into something far more dangerous than she had ever been before. He would give her a second chance at life, but that life would come with modifications that went beyond conventional medical treatment. He would make her into a living weapon, enhanced by the very parasites he planned to use to reshape the world. The procedure that saved Quiet's life involved introducing a mutant strain of vocal cord parasites into her ruined body. This strain, known as the one that covers, was related to but distinct from the language-targeting parasites Skullface planned to deploy as weapons. The Parasite Unit, Skullface's superhuman soldiers, hosted similar organisms that granted them extraordinary abilities. Quiet would receive her own variant, one tailored to her specific injuries and Skullface's requirements for her future role. The parasites didn't just save her life, they transformed her at a fundamental level. Her destroyed respiratory system was completely rebuilt, but not in the conventional way. The parasites modified Quiet's biology so that she no longer breathed through her lungs. Instead, she absorbed oxygen through her skin, a process called cutaneous respiration, normally associated with amphibians rather than humans. This radical change had immediate practical consequences. Clothing would suffocate her. She needed constant exposure to air and sunlight to survive. What appeared to be a scandalous costume choice was actually a biological necessity forced upon her by the treatment that saved her life. The modifications extended beyond respiration. The parasites replaced other damaged organs as well, including portions of her digestive system. Quiet became photosynthetic like a plant, able to draw energy directly from sunlight. This granted her incredible endurance in the field, the ability to remain in position for extended periods without food or water. It also meant she could recover from injuries with supernatural speed when exposed to light, her cellular structure healing itself through processes that defied conventional medical understanding. But these abilities came with a terrible price that Skullface had built into them by design. Along with the mutant parasite strain that granted her superhuman abilities, Skullface also infected Quiet with something else. The English strain of vocal cord parasites lay dormant within her throat, waiting. These organisms were keyed to the English language specifically. If Quiet spoke English, the parasites would activate, begin to reproduce, and eventually become contagious. She would become a vector for a plague that could potentially wipe out every English speaker on Diamond Dog's mother base. This was Skullface's insurance policy, his guarantee that even if conventional assassination failed, Quiet would still accomplish her mission. He expected her to be captured after the hospital raid. He counted on her being brought to Mother Base as either a prisoner or potential recruit. Once there, all she would need to do was speak, and the parasites would do the rest. Diamond Dogs would tear itself apart from within, everyone who spoke English falling victim to organisms that devoured their lungs from the inside out. Quiet herself would die in the process, but Skullface considered that an acceptable loss in service to his greater goals. When Quiet regained consciousness after the procedure, she found herself transformed into something that was no longer entirely human. Her body had been rebuilt by organisms that lived within her cells. Her ability to survive depended on behaviors, minimal clothing, maximum sun exposure, that would mark her as different, as other in any conventional military context. And most significantly, she carried within her throat a weapon of mass destruction that would activate the moment she spoke the English language. She was a bomb designed to look like a human, a biological weapon wrapped in human skin. Skullface deployed this transformed Quiet back to Afghanistan with new orders. He sent her to eliminate Soviet officers who opposed his development of Sahelanthropus, the massive bipedal weapons platform that represented the culmination of his military technology research. This mission served multiple purposes. It kept her active and sharp while she waited for her ultimate target to appear. It also furthered XOF's operations in the region by removing obstacles to Skullface's plans. But most importantly, it positioned Quiet exactly where Skullface expected Venom Snake to eventually show up once he began rebuilding his military forces. The pieces were in place. The trap was set. Quiet had become something that transcended her original role as a simple assassin. She was now a walking plague vector, a superhuman soldier, and a carefully positioned piece in Skullface's elaborate game of revenge. All that remained was for Venom Snake to take the bait, to encounter this mysterious sniper in the Afghan desert and make the decision that would bring her into Diamond Dogs. Skullface's plan seemed perfect, accounting for every contingency. What he hadn't accounted for was the possibility that Quiet herself might change, that exposure to Venom Snake and his ideals might transform her from a weapon into a guardian. Several months passed between Quiet's transformation and her fateful encounter with Venom Snake. During that time, she operated in Afghanistan as a ghost, completing her assigned missions with ruthless efficiency while her body adapted to its new biological requirements. Soviet forces began reporting encounters with an unusual sniper who seemed to appear and disappear without warning. They gave her a name in Russian, Tiksij, meaning the Quiet One. The name was apt for multiple reasons, describing both her silent approach and her inability to speak without triggering the parasitic plague within her. Quiet's abilities made her terrifyingly effective in this environment. The mountainous Afghan terrain provided countless sniper positions with clear lines of sight over valleys and paths below. She would perch among the ruins of ancient structures, her body nearly invisible against the stone thanks to the parasite's ability to bend light around her skin. Soviet patrols would march through areas they believed were secured, never suspecting that death watched them from above with a finger resting lightly on a trigger. The photosynthetic abilities granted by her parasite treatment meant Quiet could remain in position indefinitely without needing supply lines. She didn't require food shipments or water deliveries. The Afghan sun provided all the energy she needed, and her modified respiratory system drew oxygen from the air, touching her exposed skin. This made her the perfect guerrilla operative, someone who could maintain surveillance or wait in ambush for days or even weeks without any supporting infrastructure. Traditional military doctrine had no effective countermeasures against an opponent who existed outside normal human limitations. Her assassination technique was brutally simple. Quiet would identify her target, usually a Soviet officer whose operations interfered with Skullface's plans, and track their movements until she found the perfect moment. Then, from distances that would challenge even the most skilled conventional snipers, she would fire a single shot. The target would drop, often dead before their bodyguards even registered the crack of the rifle. By the time response forces organized to search for the shooter, Quiet would have already vanished, using the parasite's camouflaging properties to slip away invisibly. The Soviet military struggled to develop effective countermeasures. They increased security details around high-value officers. But additional guards couldn't protect against a bullet fired from nearly a kilometer away. They attempted to track the sniper's movements using traditional surveillance methods, but Quiet left no traces to follow. No patterns to predict. Some units began avoiding certain areas entirely, marking regions as too dangerous for patrol. The mysterious Tiksiji had effectively created zones of control through fear alone, demonstrating how a single exceptional operative could have strategic impact far beyond their individual actions. But Quiet wasn't just eliminating targets randomly. Each assassination served Skullface's larger objectives in the region. Some victims had been coordinating Soviet attempts to locate and secure Sahelanthropus. Others had been investigating reports of strange parasitic outbreaks in rural villages, getting too close to discovering XOF's biological weapons program. A few had simply been in positions to disrupt Skullface's operations, military and intelligence officers whose competence made them threats to the overall plan. Quiet served as a scalpel, surgically removing obstacles with precision that minimized collateral damage while maximizing strategic effect. This period also allowed Quiet to become intimately familiar with the Afghan terrain. She learned the mountains and valleys, the ancient ruins and modern military installations. She identified the best sniper positions, the optimal escape routes, the blind spots in Soviet surveillance coverage. This knowledge would prove invaluable when she eventually engaged Venom Snake, as her familiarity with the battleground gave her significant tactical advantages over an opponent who was still learning the territory. The ruins of Arbe Shifap became her favorite operational area. This ancient structure, perched high on a mountainside, offered exceptional sightlines over the valley approaches while providing numerous defensive positions. The ruins' maze-like interior created opportunities for both ambush and escape. Stone walls provided cover, while open areas allowed for long-range engagements. For a sniper of Quiet's caliber, Arbe Shifap was paradise, a natural fortress that multiplied her already formidable capabilities. During this time, Quiet's appearance continued to evolve in response to her biological requirements. The minimal clothing she wore wasn't a choice but a necessity. Any fabric covering large portions of her skin would slowly suffocate her, cutting off the cutaneous respiration that kept her alive. She wore a torn vest and shorts, the absolute minimum necessary to carry basic equipment while leaving enough skin exposed for breathing. This appearance would later draw considerable attention and criticism, but for Quiet, it represented simple survival, accommodating the parasite treatment that had saved her life while imposing its own harsh requirements. The parasites also granted Quiet other abilities beyond superhuman endurance and camouflage. Her physical strength and speed exceeded normal human limits, allowing her to make spectacular leaps between positions that would kill a conventional soldier. Her reflexes operated at enhanced speeds, letting her acquire and engage targets with inhuman precision. The healing factor meant injuries that would disable normal operatives barely slowed her down, wounds closing themselves within hours when she could expose them to direct sunlight. Yet despite these advantages, Quiet remained fundamentally human in ways that would prove significant later. She experienced emotions. She formed opinions about her targets and missions. The parasite treatment had modified her body, but hadn't erased her personality or free will. Skullface had created a superhuman weapon, but he hadn't created a puppet. This distinction mattered because it meant Quiet remained capable of making choices, of changing her mind, of potentially defying the role her creator had assigned to her. Those months in Afghanistan shaped Quiet in ways Skullface probably didn't anticipate. Operating independently for extended periods forced her to rely on her own judgment. The missions gave her opportunities to observe different sides of the conflict playing out across the region. She saw Soviet forces brutalizing Afghan civilians. She watched Mujahideen fighters defending their homeland with desperate courage. She eliminated targets, but also witnessed the collateral damage those eliminations caused. These experiences planted seeds of doubt about the absoluteness of Skullface's vision. Small questions about whether the ends truly justified the means. Then, as summer gave way toward autumn in 1984, everything changed. Venom Snake arrived in Afghanistan, beginning his own operations in the region. Diamond Dogs, the mercenary organization he had built from the ashes of Mother Base, started establishing its presence. Quiet received new orders from Skullface. The time had come to shift from her current mission to her ultimate purpose. Venom Snake needed to be drawn into position, made aware of her existence, and then defeated in a way that would lead to her capture and transport to Mother Base. The trap was ready to be sprung. Quiet positioned herself at Abe Shifab, confident in her advantages. She knew the terrain intimately. Her abilities far exceeded those of any normal soldier. She was faster, stronger, more accurate, and effectively invisible when she chose to be. Venom Snake might have legendary skills, but he was still just a human facing a superhuman opponent. The encounter should have been straightforward. Quiet would engage him, demonstrate enough of her abilities to convince him she was valuable, allow herself to be captured, and then complete her mission once inside Diamond Dogs. It was a perfect plan, with a perfect agent executing it. What could possibly go wrong? The confrontation that would define Quiet's story began when Venom Snake tracked her to the ancient ruins of Ayaba Shifab. He had learned of her existence through his intelligence network, reports of a mysterious sniper eliminating Soviet officers throughout the region. Diamond Dogs needed to investigate this operative, determine whether she represented a threat or potential opportunity. If she was as skilled as reports suggested, recruiting her could significantly strengthen their combat capabilities. If she proved hostile, eliminating her would remove a dangerous wildcard from the Afghan theater. Either way, Venom Snake needed to confront her directly. Quiet was ready for him. She had positioned herself in the ruins with careful attention to tactical advantage, occupying the high ground where her superior sightlines and mobility would matter most. The ancient stone structure sprawled across the mountainside, multiple levels connected by crumbling stairways and partially collapsed walls. Countless sniper positions offered overlapping fields of fire, while multiple escape routes prevented her from being cornered. This was her chosen battleground, terrain she understood intimately. Venom Snake was walking into a trap designed specifically to showcase her abilities while controlling the engagement on her terms. The battle began with Quiet demonstrating her supernatural capabilities. She activated the parasite's camouflaging properties, becoming effectively invisible as she moved between positions. A faint shimmer in the air marked her passage, barely perceptible even to trained eyes. This ability made conventional counter-sniper tactics useless. Venom Snake couldn't track her movements between shots. He couldn't predict where she would appear next. Every engagement became a deadly game of anticipation, trying to guess her next position before her bullet found him. Quiet also employed a laser sight, a seemingly unnecessary piece of equipment for a sniper of her caliber. But the sight served a psychological purpose rather than a practical one. The red dot dancing across Venom Snake's position was intimidation, a way of saying, "I see you, and I can kill you whenever I choose." It was arrogance born of justified confidence in her superior abilities. She was faster than him, stronger than him, equipped with abilities that defied normal human limits. The laser sight communicated that superiority, a taunt designed to destabilize his mental state and force mistakes. She hummed while she fought, a peculiar habit that added to the psychological warfare. The sound carried across the ruins, echoing off stone walls in ways that made it difficult to pinpoint her location acoustically. But it also served to unsettle her opponent, suggesting that Quiet wasn't taking this battle seriously, that she remained relaxed and confident even in the midst of combat. For someone who couldn't speak without triggering a deadly plague, humming represented one of the few ways she could express herself vocally. The melody became her signature, a calling card left at the scene of her victories. Venom Snake, however, proved to be more than just another target. He adapted to her tactics with impressive speed. Instead of trying to track her movements directly, he began watching for the environmental tells that marked her presence. The way dust stirred when she moved between positions, the faint shadow her camouflage couldn't entirely eliminate when she blocked the sun, the brief moments when she fully materialized to take her shots. He turned her own psychological tactics against her, using the laser sight to anticipate where she planned to shoot next and moving before she could fire. The battle stretched on, neither combatant able to secure decisive advantage. Quiet would disappear and reappear in new positions, firing shots that forced Venom Snake to seek cover. He would respond by lobbing grenades or tranquilizer rounds to flush her from her perch, making her abandon positions and expose herself during the movement. The ancient ruins echoed with gunfire and impacts, stone chipping away under the barrage while both fighters tested each other's limits. What surprised Quiet was how quickly Venom Snake adapted to fighting an invisible opponent. Most adversaries who survived their first encounter with her camouflage ability remained disoriented throughout the engagement, unable to overcome the fundamental disadvantage of not being able to see their enemy. But Venom Snake treated her invisibility as just another tactical problem to solve. He identified her patterns, anticipated her movements, and began predicting where she would appear next with increasing accuracy. His legendary combat instincts, honed through decades of battle, allowed him to fight effectively even against superhuman abilities. The turning point came when Venom Snake managed to predict one of Quiet's repositioning moves perfectly. As she leaped between levels of the ruins, briefly vulnerable during the movement, he struck. The impact, whether from a tranquilizer round or precise gunfire, depending on his choice, caught her mid-jump and sent her tumbling to a lower level. The fall knocked the breath from her lungs and disrupted her concentration enough that the parasite's camouflage flickered and failed. For the first time in the engagement, Quiet lay exposed and vulnerable, injured and unable to immediately reactivate her invisibility. Venom Snake approached cautiously, weapon trained on the fallen sniper. Quiet struggled to rise but found herself too damaged to effectively resist. The battle was over. She had lost. Her superior abilities hadn't been enough against an opponent whose skill and adaptability matched or exceeded her physical enhancements. She lay there in the dust, breathing heavily, though not through her mouth, but through her exposed skin, as Venom Snake stood over her with his weapon trained on her head. This moment represented a crucial decision point. Venom Snake could execute her immediately, eliminating a dangerous enemy who had just tried to kill him. Or he could order her capture and transport back to Mother Base, adding an exceptionally skilled operative to Diamond Dog's roster if she could be turned. The choice wasn't just tactical, it was philosophical, reflecting how Venom Snake approached the endless cycle of violence that defined his world. Kill enemies or try to recruit them, meet force with annihilation or with attempts at redemption. The radio crackled as Kazuhira Miller, Diamond Dog's second-in-command, weighed in with his opinion. Miller wanted Quiet dead. He saw her as too dangerous to keep alive, an unknown quantity whose abilities and allegiances remained unclear. In Miller's tactical calculus, the risks of trying to recruit such a dangerous operative outweighed any potential benefits. Better to eliminate the threat permanently than gamble on being able to control someone who had just demonstrated superhuman combat capabilities. His voice carried the weight of someone who had seen too many careful plans destroyed by unexpected variables. Revolver Ocelot, however, offered a contrary opinion. The legendary gunslinger recognized Quiet's exceptional abilities and saw opportunity where Miller saw only threat. An operative who could become invisible, who could maintain positions indefinitely without supply lines, who possessed combat skills that challenged even Venom Snake. Such a soldier could transform Diamond Dog's operational capabilities if she could be convinced to join their cause. Ocelot argued for capture rather than execution, suggesting they at least give recruitment a chance before resorting to lethal force. Venom Snake made his choice. He ordered Quiet's extraction via Fulton recovery device, inflating the balloon that would carry her unconscious body to the helicopter, waiting to transport her to Mother Base. It was a characteristically merciful decision from a man who had built his reputation partly on his willingness to give second chances. But it was also a calculated risk, betting that Quiet's value as a potential ally outweighed the dangers she represented as a captive. The Fulton device carried her into the sky, and with that, Quiet's path transformed from XOF assassin to something far more complicated. During the helicopter ride back to Mother Base, Quiet began to regain consciousness. She found herself bound and guarded, a prisoner being transported to the very facility she had been designed to infiltrate and destroy. But something unexpected happened during that flight. As the helicopter approached Mother Base, an enemy jet appeared, threatening to shoot down the aircraft and kill everyone aboard. Quiet saw the pilot lining up for his attack run. She saw Venom Snake and his team focused on the ground, unaware of the aerial threat. And in that moment, she made a choice that Skullface hadn't programmed into her. Quiet couldn't speak to warn them. The English strain parasites prevented that. But she could act. With her hands still bound, she somehow acquired a weapon. The exact mechanics remain unclear, suggesting either supernatural ability or simple overlooked security, and aimed at the attacking jet. The shot would be nearly impossible for a normal sniper even under optimal conditions, much less for someone bound and shooting from a moving helicopter at another moving aerial target. But Quiet wasn't a normal sniper. She made the shot, her bullet piercing the jet's cockpit and killing the pilot, sending the enemy aircraft spinning out of control and eliminating the threat. This action saved everyone aboard the helicopter, including Venom Snake himself. It demonstrated that despite her previous attempts to kill him, despite being XOF's operative sent to destroy Diamond Dogs, Quiet had chosen to protect rather than attack when given the opportunity. The reasons for this choice remained unclear. Perhaps she saw value in preserving her own life by ensuring the helicopter's survival. Perhaps something about Venom Snake's decision to capture rather than execute her had affected her thinking. Or perhaps the seeds of doubt planted during her months operating independently in Afghanistan had finally begun to sprout, making her question whether Skullface's plans truly aligned with her own values. When the helicopter finally reached Mother Base, Quiet surrendered peacefully into custody. She made no attempt to escape or resist as soldiers escorted her to a detention cell on the medical platform. She complied with processing, submitted to examination and documentation, allowed herself to be locked away without complaint. This behavior puzzled Diamond Dogs' staff. An operative with Quiet's abilities could have created chaos during the arrival process. She could have escaped multiple times during transport from the landing pad to her cell. Yet she chose cooperation over resistance, acting more like someone seeking asylum than someone being held prisoner. Miller remained deeply suspicious of Quiet's motivations. In his view, her actions in saving the helicopter could have been simple self-preservation rather than genuine goodwill toward Diamond Dogs. He saw her cooperation as potentially strategic, a way to lower their guard and gain access to sensitive areas of Mother Base. Miller argued strongly for her execution, suggesting that keeping such a dangerous prisoner created unacceptable security risks. The fact that she refused all communication, speaking in no language, writing nothing, responding to interrogation with only silence, made it impossible to assess her true intentions or allegiances. Ocelot, conversely, saw Quiet's silence and cooperation as interesting data points, suggesting she might be valuable rather than simply dangerous. Her willingness to enter captivity, her life-saving intervention during the helicopter attack, her subsequent peaceful behavior, these suggested someone going through a fundamental shift in loyalties. Ocelot proposed keeping her confined but alive, using the detention period to assess whether she could eventually become a useful asset. He also suggested that Venom Snake himself should be the one to make the final determination, given his direct experience fighting against her and being saved by her. Venom Snake made his position clear. Quiet would live, at least for now. She would remain in detention while Diamond Dogs assessed whether she posed a genuine threat or represented a recruitment opportunity. If she ultimately proved too dangerous to keep alive, Venom Snake promised he would be the one to pull the trigger personally. This decision reflected both mercy and accountability, giving Quiet a chance to prove herself while establishing clear responsibility for what would happen if that gamble failed. So Quiet settled into her cell on Mother Base, a prison that would slowly transform into something else entirely. She remained silent, observing her captors through watchful eyes while they debated her fate. Outside her cell, Diamond Dogs personnel struggled to understand what they had captured. Inside, Quiet herself grappled with questions about her own identity and purpose. Skullface had sent her here to destroy these people, but she had just saved their lives instead. What did that mean? What did it make her? And what would happen when the parasites within her finally demanded she speak the words that would kill everyone around her? The trap had been sprung, but not in the way Skullface had planned. Quiet was inside Diamond Dog's as intended, but her behavior suggested the plan might have gone sideways in ways he hadn't anticipated. The biological weapon sat in a cell on Mother Base, but whether she remained a weapon or might become something else entirely remained an open question, and in that uncertainty lay the seeds of everything that would follow, the strange and tragic story of a sniper who couldn't speak finding redemption through a soldier who chose mercy over vengeance. The medical platform cell where Quiet spent her initial weeks on Mother Base was sparse by design. A simple bed, basic facilities, walls of reinforced glass allowing guards to maintain constant visual surveillance without entering the space. It wasn't designed for comfort, but for security. A holding area where dangerous prisoners could be contained while their ultimate disposition was determined. Quiet accepted these conditions without visible complaint, spending her time sitting quietly, occasionally standing to stretch or pace the small space, but never attempting to escape despite having abilities that could probably have facilitated a breakout. What Diamond Dog's staff found most unsettling about Quiet during this period was her absolute silence. Most prisoners, even trained operatives accustomed to interrogation, eventually break down and communicate something. They might refuse to answer questions, but they'll usually engage in some way, negotiating for better conditions, demanding to see superiors, making threats, or simply expressing anger at their captivity. Quiet did none of these things. She remained completely silent, not speaking, not writing, not using any form of communication whatsoever. This behavior frustrated interrogators and security personnel alike, leaving them unable to establish even basic rapport or understanding of her motivations. Her appearance also generated significant discussion among Mother Base personnel. The minimal clothing Quiet wore had practical necessity. Her modified respiratory system required extensive skin exposure, but that explanation wasn't immediately apparent to soldiers who didn't understand her biological modifications. Some saw her attire as intentionally provocative, others as evidence of psychological issues, still others as a tactical attempt to distract or manipulate through sexuality. These interpretations said more about the observers than about Quiet herself, revealing the difficulty Diamond Dog's personnel had in understanding someone whose lived reality fell completely outside conventional human experience. Medical examinations revealed some of Quiet's unusual physiological characteristics, though the full extent of her modifications remained mysterious. Doctors noted her lack of conventional respiration, the way she seemed to absorb oxygen directly through her exposed skin. They documented anomalies in her cellular structure that suggested extensive biological modification. Her ability to survive without food or water raised questions about her metabolic processes, but the medical staff couldn't identify the specific mechanism behind these changes, and Quiet's refusal to communicate prevented them from asking her directly about her condition. Miller grew increasingly frustrated with the situation. Every day, Quiet remained on Mother Base represented a potential security threat in his assessment. She might be gathering intelligence about their operations. She could be waiting for the right moment to escape or sabotage critical systems. Her silence prevented any meaningful assessment of her loyalties or intentions. Miller argued repeatedly for executing her, suggesting that whatever value she might offer as a recruit couldn't justify the ongoing risks of keeping such a dangerous unknown entity inside their headquarters facility. Ocelot, however, continued to advocate for patience. He pointed out that Quiet had multiple opportunities to cause harm, but had taken none of them. Her behavior during capture and transport had been compliant rather than hostile. Most significantly, she had actively protected Diamond Dog's personnel by shooting down the enemy jet threatening their helicopter. These actions suggested someone undergoing a shift in allegiances, not someone maintaining hostile intent while pretending cooperation. Ocelot recommended giving her more time, allowing that transformation process to continue rather than cutting it short through premature execution. Venom Snake himself visited Quiet's cell periodically, studying her through the reinforced glass, trying to understand this enigmatic prisoner. She would meet his gaze sometimes, her green eyes watchful and alert. Other times, she would ignore him entirely, seeming lost in her own thoughts. He found himself unable to read her, this silent woman who had tried to kill him but then saved his life. The complexity of her character intrigued him in ways that simpler enemies never had. She represented a puzzle, and Venom Snake had always been drawn to solving puzzles. The situation changed when Quiet suddenly attacked a Diamond Dog's staff member, seemingly without provocation. Two operatives came to the man's aid, and Quiet beat down all three of them with casual efficiency that demonstrated just how much she had been holding back during her captivity. Venom Snake and Ocelot intervened, subduing her before she could cause serious injuries. Ocelot administered a sedative, and Quiet was returned to her cell with enhanced security measures. The incident seemed to confirm Miller's worst fears about keeping such a dangerous prisoner on Mother Base. But later investigation revealed a crucial detail. The man Quiet attacked had been infected with the Kikongo strain of vocal cord parasites. These organisms, keyed to target speakers of specific African languages, had infiltrated Mother Base through unknown vectors. The infected individual would have eventually become contagious, potentially triggering an outbreak that could kill dozens or hundreds of Diamond Dog's personnel. Quiet had recognized the threat somehow, perhaps through senses enhanced by her own parasitic modifications, and taken violent action to prevent the spread of a deadly plague. This revelation dramatically shifted perceptions of Quiet among Diamond Dog's leadership. Her seemingly unprovoked attack had actually been a desperate attempt to protect Mother Base personnel from biological warfare. She had tried to eliminate an infected individual before he could spread the disease to others. The fact that she couldn't explain her actions through speech had made her intervention appear violent and unstable when it was actually protective and rational. Quiet had saved lives again, and again she couldn't explain why or how she had known to act. Code Talker's arrival at Mother Base provided the breakthrough that finally allowed understanding of Quiet's situation. The elderly DNA scientist specialized in parasitology and had unwillingly worked for Skullface in developing the vocal cord parasites as biological weapons. After his rescue by Venom Snake and defection to Diamond Dogs, Code Talker began analyzing the parasite outbreak affecting the base. His research quickly identified Quiet as hosting not just the parasite strain that granted her superhuman abilities, but also the English strain of vocal cord parasites designed to target language speakers. When Miller ordered Quiet to be tortured for information about Skullface's plans, an action that Venom Snake and Ocelot reluctantly permitted given the desperate circumstances of the parasite outbreak, Code Talker made a crucial intervention. He recognized that torturing Quiet would be counterproductive and cruel, given that she physically couldn't reveal information through normal interrogation. Instead, he spoke to her in Navajo, a language he knew from his childhood among the Diné people. To everyone's shock, Quiet responded, speaking back to Code Talker in the same tongue. This exchange revealed several critical pieces of information. First, Quiet could speak. She simply chose not to in most languages. Second, she spoke Navajo specifically because the vocal cord parasites Code Talker had engineered were designed not to affect that language, a small act of resistance by the scientist against Skullface's plans. Third, and most importantly, Quiet confirmed to Code Talker that she had been deliberately infected with the English strain parasites and deployed to Mother Base as a biological weapon. Speaking English would activate the parasites, making them contagious and potentially killing everyone on the base who spoke the lingua franca of Diamond Dog's operations. Quiet told Code Talker in Navajo that she had decided never to speak English again. Despite being sent by Skullface to infiltrate and destroy Diamond Dogs, despite carrying within her the means to complete that mission, she had chosen to protect the very people she was supposed to kill. This decision explained her silence, her apparent changes in loyalty, her protective actions during the helicopter attack and the Kikongo outbreak. Quiet had defected from XOF in her heart, even though her body remained the weapon Skullface had designed her to be. She couldn't remove the English parasites without killing herself, but she could choose never to activate them by remaining silent. This revelation transformed how Diamond Dogs viewed Quiet. She wasn't a time bomb waiting to explode. She was someone making extraordinary sacrifices to protect people she had been designed to destroy. Her silence wasn't stubbornness or manipulation, it was an act of tremendous self-discipline and loyalty. Denying herself the most basic human expression, language, communication, the ability to explain herself, in order to keep dangerous organisms dormant within her throat. Every moment she remained silent was a moment she chose protection over harm, even at great personal cost. Miller's position softened somewhat after learning this, though he remained suspicious and concerned. The fact remained that Quiet carried within her a weapon capable of devastating Mother Base. Her good intentions couldn't change the biological reality of her situation. One slip, one moment of unconscious speech, even one spoken English word in her sleep, could trigger the very catastrophe she was trying to prevent. Miller argued that the compassionate thing might actually be to execute her mercifully, ending the tremendous burden she carried and eliminating the risk she represented. But Ocelot and Venom Snake saw another option. Quiet's skills and abilities could make her tremendously valuable as an operative if she chose to work with Diamond Dogs. Her silence wouldn't be a liability in the field, but rather an asset, given her other enhanced abilities. Most importantly, allowing her to serve alongside them would give her life purpose and meaning beyond simple survival in a cell. She wanted to fight, wanted to contribute, wanted to be part of something larger than herself. Why not let her, as long as she maintained her silence and never spoke the language that would doom them all? The breakthrough came when Quiet snuck out of her cell without authorization, attempting to accompany Venom Snake on a mission. When Miller caught her and moved to forcibly return her to detention, Ocelot intervened with an alternative proposal. Let her prove herself in the field, put her skills to use on an actual operation. If she performed well and caused no problems, they could consider making her operational status permanent. If she proved unreliable or dangerous, they could always return her to detention or reconsider Miller's execution recommendation. Venom Snake agreed to this trial period. Quiet would accompany him on missions as his buddy, providing overwatch and support from sniper positions. This arrangement would keep her under direct supervision while allowing her to demonstrate her value to the organization. If things went well, she might eventually earn full acceptance into Diamond Dogs. If they went poorly, well, Venom Snake had already promised he would be the one to pull the trigger if Quiet proved too dangerous to keep alive. Thus began Quiet's integration into Diamond Dogs as an active operative rather than a prisoner. She moved from her cell on the medical platform to quarters in the operations area, gaining increasing freedom as she demonstrated reliability and competence. Her relationship with Venom Snake evolved from captor-captive to something resembling partnership as they worked together on missions. The bond between them grew through shared combat experience, mutual respect developing between two legendary soldiers who had found themselves on opposite sides of Skullface's war but chose to fight together anyway. This transformation from weapon to warrior, from enemy to ally, from isolated prisoner to valued member of Diamond Dogs represented a remarkable shift. Skullface had designed Quiet to be his perfect instrument of revenge against Big Boss and his forces. But by making her too human, by failing to strip away her capacity for independent thought and moral reasoning, he had created someone capable of choosing her own path. And Quiet had chosen protection over destruction, silence over speech, life with Diamond Dogs over death in service to XOF. It was a transformation that would define everything that followed in her story. The foundation for both the happiness and tragedy yet to come. Life at Mother Base fundamentally changed for Quiet once she transitioned from prisoner to active operative. Instead of spending days in a small cell watching guards watch her, she now had freedom to move throughout the installation with relatively few restrictions. She maintained quarters near the operations area where mission preparation occurred. She had access to the armory to maintain and upgrade her weapons. Most significantly, she could deploy into the field alongside Venom Snake, finally putting her extraordinary abilities to use in service of something she had chosen rather than something imposed upon her by Skullface. The buddy system Diamond Dogs employed allowed operatives like Quiet to accompany Venom Snake on missions, providing specialized support tailored to their unique capabilities. D-Dog, the one-eyed wolf snake had rescued as a puppy, offered reconnaissance and tracking abilities. D-Horse provided transportation across difficult terrain. D-Walker, a small bipedal weapons platform, gave mobile fire support. But Quiet's contributions as a buddy surpassed all these other options in specific mission types, particularly those requiring stealth and precision elimination of high-value targets. Her superhuman abilities made Quiet exceptional in combat support roles. She could occupy sniper positions that would be impossible for normal humans to reach, using her enhanced strength and agility to scale structures and leap across gaps that conventional soldiers couldn't traverse. Once positioned, she could remain there indefinitely without need for supply deliveries or shift rotations. Her photosynthetic metabolism and cutaneous respiration eliminating the logistical constraints that limited normal snipers. Her camouflage abilities allowed her to maintain overwatch without being detected even by security forces specifically searching for supporting elements. When Venom Snake deployed into hostile territory with Quiet as his buddy, they developed an effective operational rhythm. He would handle infiltration and close-quarters work, while she provided covering fire from elevated positions. If guards spotted Snake, Quiet could neutralize them before they triggered alarms. If reinforcements approached, she could eliminate them at range before they reached his location. If he needed an evacuation route cleared, she could systematically eliminate sentries blocking his path to the extraction point. Her contributions transformed difficult missions into manageable ones and made risky operations considerably safer. The bond system Diamond Dogs used to measure the relationship between Snake and his buddies demonstrated Quiet's increasing integration into the team. At first, when their bond level was low, Quiet maintained professional distance. She would wait for explicit orders before acting, her body language suggesting wariness and uncertainty about her role. When given commands, she would acknowledge with a simple downward glance the minimal possible confirmation that suggested someone still unsure of their place in the organization. She sat apart from Snake in the helicopter, maintaining physical and emotional distance. As their bond grew through successful missions and shared combat experiences, Quiet's behavior transformed. She became more proactive in engaging enemies without waiting for specific orders, trusting her own judgment about when to act. Her acknowledgements of Snake's commands shifted from simple downward glances to confident thumbs-up gestures that communicated enthusiasm rather than mere compliance. She began sitting closer to Snake in the helicopter, and when he issued orders in the field, she would meet his gaze directly rather than looking away. Small behavioral shifts that spoke volumes about increasing comfort and trust. At maximum bond, Quiet's combat effectiveness reached extraordinary levels. She could mark enemies automatically, sharing target information through some unspoken connection with Snake. She would reposition proactively based on tactical situation rather than requiring micromanagement. Her shooting accuracy somehow exceeded even her already superhuman baseline, as if perfect understanding of Snake's intentions allowed her to anticipate targets before they became threats. The partnership between them approached the telepathic, two warriors operating as a single tactical unit, despite never exchanging a spoken word. Quiet's weapons loadout reflected her role and capabilities. Her standard rifle, nicknamed the Wicked Butterfly, was a high-powered sniper rifle optimized for lethal precision at extreme ranges. When missions required non-lethal approaches, she could switch to the Guilty Butterfly, firing tranquilizer rounds that would incapacitate rather than kill. For extremely difficult targets requiring maximum firepower, she employed the Sinful Butterfly, a devastating rifle that could penetrate armored vehicles and destroy equipment from distances that defied conventional ballistics. These weapons, combined with her superhuman marksmanship, made her one of the most dangerous individual combatants in the world. The specifics of how Quiet transitioned between positions during missions remained somewhat mysterious even to those working alongside her. She would occupy one sniper perch, engage targets, and then seemingly vanish, reappearing moments later at a completely different location, sometimes hundreds of meters away. The parasite camouflage explained how she moved unseen, but the speed and distance of these repositions suggested capabilities beyond simple invisibility. Perhaps the parasite enhancement extended to her muscular system, granting speed and endurance that allowed sprints a conventional human couldn't maintain. Or perhaps she had other abilities that weren't immediately apparent to her allies. What became clear through repeated missions was that Quiet genuinely cared about Snake's safety and mission success. She would take risks to protect him, exposing herself to enemy fire to draw attention away from his position. She would pursue retreating enemies to prevent them from calling reinforcements. She would remain in Overwatch long after mission completion, ensuring safe extraction even when she herself could have withdrawn earlier. These weren't actions of someone following orders grudgingly. They were choices made by someone who had come to value Snake's life and their shared missions. The relationship between Quiet and Snake transcended simple professional partnership. Revolver Ocelot, ever observant of human relationships and their implications, noted that Quiet appeared to have fallen in love with Snake. This wasn't mere physical attraction, though chemistry certainly existed between them. It was something deeper, a bond formed through shared danger and mutual respect. Snake represented mercy when Quiet had expected death, partnership when she had known only obedience to Skullface's commands, and purpose when her existence had narrowed to simply surviving day by day while carrying a plague within her throat. One particular incident crystallized the nature of their relationship. After numerous missions together, when their bond had reached maximum levels, an optional scene could trigger at Mother Base during rain. Quiet and Snake found themselves caught in a downpour, the water warm against their skin as they stood together on the platform. What followed was playful rather than professional, the two warriors splashing each other like children, momentarily setting aside the weight of their responsibilities to simply enjoy a moment of human connection. For Quiet, who spent every moment denying herself the ability to speak, this physical playfulness represented rare permission to express joy. The scene was controversial among observers for its seemingly gratuitous focus on Quiet's minimal clothing and the suggestive nature of wet fabric. But from her perspective, it represented something more significant, a moment of normalcy, of being seen as a person rather than a weapon, of connecting with someone who understood the extraordinary sacrifices she made every moment of every day. The rain itself was significant because Quiet could absorb water through her skin rather than drinking it, the droplets providing hydration through cutaneous absorption. The scene was at once practical, playful, and deeply personal, a breakthrough in their relationship that acknowledged both Quiet's unique biology and her fundamental humanity. Other small moments reinforced the growing bond between them. On Snake's birthday, Quiet would light his cigar for him, a small gesture of care and attention. She would watch him in the helicopter with affection evident in her gaze. When missions went poorly and Snake returned to Mother Base covered in blood and dirt, Quiet would sometimes intercede before Ocelot could douse him with cleaning water, taking Snake to her own quarters instead, the implications left to imagination, but clearly suggesting deep intimacy had developed between them. These were not the behaviors of a biological weapon tolerating necessary cooperation with former enemies. These were the actions of someone who had found meaning, purpose, and love in unexpected places. Yet the shadow of her condition never fully lifted. Every moment Quiet spent at Mother Base, every mission she completed, every interaction with Diamond Dog's personnel, all of it existed under the constant threat of catastrophe. The English strain parasites remained in her throat, dormant but not dead. If she spoke even a single word of English, even accidentally in her sleep, or reflexively when startled, the organisms would activate and begin reproducing. Within hours, she would become contagious. Within days, the outbreak would devastate Mother Base. Quiet's value as an operative was remarkable, but the risk she represented could never be completely eliminated as long as she carried the parasites within her. This tension shaped how Diamond Dog's personnel viewed Quiet. Some, like Ocelot and Snake himself, chose to focus on her contributions and loyalty, treating the parasite threat as an acceptable risk given proper management. Others, like Miller, never fully overcame their suspicion and concern, seeing Quiet as a walking apocalypse that organizational policy kept at bay through nothing more than her own self-discipline. The fact that Mother Base had already suffered one major parasite outbreak, with dozens of soldiers dying despite Code Talker's intervention, made the fear concrete rather than abstract. Everyone knew what could happen if Quiet's silence failed. But perhaps most poignantly, Quiet herself lived with the knowledge that her presence endangered everyone she had come to care about. Every day she woke up on Mother Base was another day she chose to maintain her silence rather than give in to the simple human need to speak. She couldn't laugh freely at jokes, couldn't cry out in pain when injured, couldn't whisper reassurances to Snake during quiet moments together, couldn't sing, couldn't sigh with contentment, couldn't express the thousand small vocalizations that make up normal human interaction. She was trapped in perpetual silence, her vocal cords a prison she dared not open lest she destroy everything she had built. This fundamental tension between her value and her danger, between her loyalty and her biological reality, between the love she felt and the threat she represented, this would ultimately shape her fate. For now, in the middle period of her time with Diamond Dogs, Quiet existed in a strange equilibrium. She fought alongside Snake, contributed to mission successes, developed relationships with base personnel who overcame their initial suspicions, and found purpose and meaning in serving Diamond Dogs. It was as close to happy as someone in her situation could hope to be. But equilibriums are fragile things, easily disrupted by changing circumstances. And circumstances were about to change dramatically. The cascade of events leading to Quiet's departure from Diamond Dogs began with another parasite outbreak, though this one involved different strains and different vectors than the one Quiet had helped prevent earlier. Huey Emmerich, the scientist responsible for numerous betrayals, including the destruction of the original Mother Base, had been conducting unauthorized experiments with the parasites and Wolbachia bacteria that Code Talker used to sterilize them. Huey's tampering had created a mutated strain that escaped containment, forcing Diamond Dogs to quarantine affected personnel and scramble to contain the outbreak before it became catastrophic. The incident drove home the reality that parasites represented an ongoing existential threat to Mother Base's survival. Code Talker's expertise had prevented catastrophe during the initial Kikongo outbreak, but his solutions weren't perfect. The Wolbachia treatment that sterilized parasites also rendered treated personnel infertile, a heavy price to pay for survival. The mutated strain Huey created suggested that parasites could evolve and adapt in unpredictable ways. And Quiet remained the largest potential vector for an outbreak, carrying within her the English strain that could devastate the primarily English-speaking Diamond Dogs if ever activated. Quiet recognized this reality better than anyone. She knew the risk she represented wasn't theoretical, but constant and potentially uncontrollable. During the outbreak crisis, while medical teams struggled to contain the situation and soldiers faced the prospect of being executed to prevent further spread, Quiet quietly disappeared from Mother Base. She didn't announce her departure or seek permission. She simply vanished one day, using the same camouflage abilities that had made her such an effective operative to slip away undetected from the facility that had become her home. Miller immediately interpreted her disappearance as betrayal, the confirmation of every suspicion he had harbored about Quiet from the beginning. In his view, she had waited until Mother Base was vulnerable and then fled, probably to report back to what remained of XOF or to otherwise undermine Diamond Dogs from outside. He pressured Snake to hunt her down and complete the execution that had always been the alternative to successful recruitment. Quiet had proven herself unreliable at the worst possible moment, abandoning her allies during a crisis. That she had made it this far didn't mean she deserved any more chances. But Quiet hadn't betrayed Diamond Dogs. She had done the opposite. She had removed herself from Mother Base because the outbreak reminded her that her presence represented an ongoing threat. As long as she remained at the facility, the possibility existed that something might make her speak English. Injury, unconsciousness, capture by enemy forces who might torture her into vocalization, or simply an accident during sleep. By leaving, she eliminated that risk, protecting the people she cared about by taking herself out of the equation. It was an act of tremendous self-sacrifice, masquerading as abandonment. Quiet traveled to Afghanistan, where her story with Diamond Dogs had begun. She positioned herself in the region's remote areas, continuing to operate as a sniper, but now working independently rather than as Snake's buddy. Intelligence reports reached Diamond Dogs of a mysterious sniper eliminating Soviet forces in Afghanistan, suggesting Quiet was continuing to fight even in self-imposed exile. But without Diamond Dog's support structure, without Snake's partnership, without access to Mother Base's resources, Quiet operated at significant disadvantage against the Soviet occupation forces. The Soviet military, having suffered from Quiet's predations for months, eventually mounted a successful operation to capture her. A major force converged on her last known position, overwhelming even her enhanced abilities through sheer numbers and coordinated tactics. They took her alive, a significant feat against someone with superhuman capabilities, and transported her to Lamar Kate Palace, a facility they controlled in the Afghan mountains. There, they planned to interrogate her for information about Diamond Dogs and potentially use her as leverage against Snake if he could be drawn into a rescue attempt. Snake learned of Quiet's capture through his intelligence network. Despite Miller's arguments that Quiet had abandoned them and didn't deserve rescue, Snake prepared to deploy immediately. His reasoning was both tactical and personal. Tactically, he couldn't allow the Soviets to interrogate Quiet and potentially learn Diamond Dog's operational secrets. Personally, he owed Quiet too much to abandon her to enemy captivity, regardless of why she had left Mother Base. The fact that she might not want rescue didn't change his determination to attempt it. He had promised to pull the trigger if she proved too dangerous, but he had also implicitly promised to stand by her as long as she stood by Diamond Dogs. Her departure, whatever motivated it, didn't negate that obligation. Mission 45, designated a Quiet exit, began as a rescue operation. Snake deployed to Afghanistan with instructions to reach Lamar Kate Palace and extract Quiet before Soviet interrogators broke her or before a larger force could be assembled to transport her to a more secure facility elsewhere. The mission parameters seemed straightforward: infiltrate enemy facility, locate prisoner, extract under fire. The sort of operation Diamond Dogs had conducted dozens of times before. Nothing suggested this would be any different, that events would unfold in ways that would fundamentally transform both Snake and Quiet's futures. When Snake reached the palace, he found Quiet held in one of its buildings under moderate guard. The extraction itself proceeded smoothly, with Quiet appearing weak from captivity but still functional. But as they attempted to leave the area, the situation deteriorated rapidly. A massive Soviet mechanized force converged on their position, apparently having used Quiet as bait to draw Snake into a kill zone. Tanks, armored personnel carriers, a gunship helicopter, and supporting infantry surrounded the palace ruins, cutting off escape routes and pounding their position with overwhelming firepower. The battle that followed tested both Snake and Quiet to their absolute limits. They fell back to defensive positions in the palace ruins, Snake using a rocket launcher to engage the armored vehicles, while Quiet provided supporting sniper fire against infantry and softer targets. Supply drops kept them in ammunition as they burned through explosives at a prodigious rate. The fight stretched on for nearly an hour, wave after wave of Soviet armor approaching the palace only to be destroyed by desperate defensive fire from the surrounded pair. What made the battle remarkable was how effectively Snake and Quiet fought together. Despite months apart, despite the circumstances that had led to Quiet's departure from Mother Base, they fell immediately back into the combat rhythm they had developed during their previous missions together. Quiet would mark targets for Snake's rockets, letting him prioritize the most dangerous vehicles. Snake would draw attention away from Quiet's sniper positions, giving her clear shots without incoming fire. They communicated through actions rather than words, each anticipating the other's needs and responding before requests needed to be made. It was partnership at its highest level, two legendary warriors defending each other against impossible odds. But the cost of the battle was extreme. Quiet took damage protecting Snake, exposing herself to enemy fire to create opportunities for him. Snake burned through his armor and medical supplies, keeping himself functional under sustained assault. Both of them pushed themselves beyond normal human limits, operating in that desperate space where only perfect execution prevents death. The Soviet force seemed endless, vehicles and soldiers continuing to pour into the valley as if the military was determined to destroy both Snake and Quiet, regardless of the cost. Eventually, through skill and determination, and an immense expenditure of ammunition, they succeeded in destroying the entire Soviet force. The valley around Lamar Kate Palace became a graveyard of burned-out tanks and downed helicopters. Bodies littered the approach routes. The palace itself bore fresh scars from rocket impacts and machine gun fire. Both Snake and Quiet were exhausted, injured, running on adrenaline and will rather than actual reserves of energy. But they had survived. They had won. The extraction helicopter was inbound, and soon they would be away from this cursed place and back at Mother Base where they could properly recover. Then Snake collapsed. The combat stress, accumulated injuries, and sheer physical demands of the extended battle had pushed him past his breaking point. But it wasn't just fatigue. In his weakened state, Snake had been bitten by a venomous snake, the kind of chance accident that seems cruelly ironic in its timing. The venom was fast-acting and deadly, shutting down his nervous system as his body failed to mount effective immune response in its depleted state. He lay there in the Afghan dirt, consciousness fading, unable to call for help or even move toward the incoming helicopter. Quiet knelt beside him, recognizing the symptoms, understanding that Snake was dying. She knew the extraction helicopter couldn't land immediately due to a sandstorm rolling through the valley. She knew Snake needed anti-venom immediately, or he would be dead before the weather cleared enough for Pequod, Diamond Dog's pilot, to safely approach. She knew what she needed to do, and she knew what it would cost her. Pequod's voice crackled over the radio, asking for guidance about where to land, given the deteriorating visibility. He spoke in English, the lingua franca of Diamond Dog's operations. Under normal circumstances, someone on the ground would guide him to a landing zone using standard communication protocols. But Snake couldn't speak, couldn't even reach his radio in his paralyzed state. Only Quiet remained functional enough to respond. And the only language Pequod would understand was English. For months, Quiet had maintained perfect silence in English, never speaking a word of the language despite countless situations where doing so would have been convenient or helpful. She had endured torture, captivity, combat, and social isolation rather than risk activating the parasites in her throat. Her entire time with Diamond Dogs had been defined by this one constant prohibition. Do not speak English under any circumstances, because speaking English meant death for everyone. It was the boundary she had never crossed, the line she had maintained through extraordinary discipline and sacrifice. But now Snake lay dying at her feet. The man who had spared her when he could have executed her. The man who had given her purpose and partnership and acceptance. The man she loved. And speaking English could save him. She had a choice. Maintain her silence and watch Snake die, preserving her own safety and protecting Mother Base from the parasites she carried. Or speak, save Snake's life, and accept the consequences of activating the biological weapon within her throat. Quiet made her choice. She picked up the radio and spoke in English for the first time since joining Diamond Dogs. Her voice was rough from disuse, the words awkward after months of silence, but comprehensible. She told Pequod exactly where Snake was located. She instructed him where to find the anti-venom Snake needed. She guided the helicopter to a safe landing zone through the sandstorm. And in doing so, she activated the English strain parasites that had been dormant within her since Skullface's treatment following the hospital raid. Pequod administered the anti-venom successfully. Snake's condition stabilized. The helicopter lifted off, carrying both of them away from Lamar Kate Palace toward Mother Base. But Quiet knew what she had done. By speaking English, she had triggered the parasite's reproductive cycle. Within hours, they would begin multiplying within her throat. Within days, she would become contagious, capable of spreading the organisms to anyone who came into close contact with her respiratory fluids. And because everyone on Mother Base spoke English, she would effectively become a plague carrier whose mere presence could trigger the very catastrophe she had spent months preventing. During the flight back, Snake regained consciousness. His first question, immediately upon awakening, was about Quiet. How was she? Was she injured? The fact that his immediate concern upon recovering from potentially fatal envenomation was Quiet's welfare demonstrated the depth of their bond. But Quiet couldn't respond to his concern. She sat apart from him in the helicopter, already feeling the parasites beginning to activate within her throat, knowing what came next and what it would mean. As the helicopter flew through the Afghan night toward Mother Base, Quiet understood that her time with Diamond Dogs had ended. She had made the choice to save Snake's life by speaking English. That choice had been correct, even inevitable. She couldn't have lived with herself if she had allowed Snake to die when she could have prevented it. But consequences followed choices regardless of their moral correctness. The parasites within her were awakening. Soon she would become the weapon Skullface had always intended her to be, except now she would destroy the people she had come to care about rather than enemies she had been designed to eliminate. There was only one acceptable outcome. Quiet needed to leave and never return. She needed to remove herself from Mother Base permanently before the parasites became contagious. She needed to disappear into the desert and stay there, isolating herself completely until the parasites killed her or until she figured out some other solution. Most likely, it meant wandering into the wilderness to die alone, ensuring that her infection claimed only one victim rather than hundreds. It was the only way to protect Diamond Dogs from the consequences of her choice to save Snake. So as the helicopter approached Mother Base, Quiet prepared for her departure. She left behind a cassette tape for Snake, a recording in which she hummed a wordless melody, the only form of vocal expression she had permitted herself during her time with Diamond Dogs. The tune was melancholy but beautiful, a goodbye gift from someone who had never been able to say goodbye properly. It expressed everything she couldn't say with words: gratitude, affection, regret, hope, sorrow, love. And then she left, slipping away from Mother Base one final time, this departure permanent where the previous one had been temporary. Snake received the cassette tape and understood its implications. Quiet was gone. She had sacrificed herself to save his life, knowing it would cost her everything. The phantom pain of her absence would haunt Diamond Dogs, a hole in their operations and in his heart that couldn't be filled. But he also understood why she had to leave, accepted that her decision was correct, even if it tore at him. Quiet had proven herself in the most final way possible, demonstrating that her loyalty to Diamond Dogs was absolute even unto death. And he had to honor that loyalty by letting her go rather than following after her and potentially becoming infected himself. Quiet walked into the Afghan desert alone, her fate uncertain. The last anyone saw of her, she was heading deeper into the wilderness, away from population centers, away from people she might infect. The parasites within her throat were active now, reproducing, spreading through her system. Soon she would become contagious. Soon after that, the organisms would begin consuming her lungs from within, killing her slowly and painfully. This was the end that Skullface had always planned for her, just delivered much later and in very different circumstances than he had intended. Or perhaps not the end. The game left Quiet's ultimate fate ambiguous. Did she die alone in the desert? Did she somehow find a way to survive the parasites, perhaps through her body's other parasitic enhancements, helping her resist the English strain? Did she continue operating as a sniper in some remote region, helping people from a distance while maintaining permanent isolation? The answers remain unknown, deliberately so, allowing each person who heard her story to imagine their own conclusion for the silent sniper who sacrificed everything to save the man she loved. What's certain is that Quiet's legacy endured within Diamond Dogs. Personnel who had worked with her remembered her contributions and mourned her loss. Snake carried the cassette tape she left him, listening to her humming during quiet moments, reminded of the price she had paid and the choice she had made. The buddy system had a permanent empty slot where Quiet used to appear, a digital ghost haunting the organizational systems that had once tracked her bond level and deployment statistics. And somewhere in the world, whether alive or dead, whether still fighting or finally at rest, whether walking the earth or existing only in memory, Quiet remained what she had always been, a warrior who chose silence over speech, sacrifice over safety, and love over survival. Her story ended where it began, in fire and transformation, but the meaning of that transformation had changed completely. She had started as a weapon designed to destroy Big Boss and his legacy. She ended as a guardian who gave everything to preserve them. It was a redemption arc measured not in words, but in deeds, not in explanations, but in actions, not in what she said, but in what she chose not to say, even when staying silent cost her the world. To understand the full significance of Quiet's story, we need to step back and examine the larger themes her character represented within Metal Gear Solid 5's narrative. The game, Hideo Kojima's final installment in the Metal Gear series dealt extensively with themes of language, identity, revenge, and the cycles of violence that perpetuate themselves across generations. Quiet embodied all of these themes in concentrated form, making her not just a supporting character, but a central pillar of the game's philosophical framework. Language stood at the very heart of Skullface's plan, and, by extension, at the heart of Quiet's condition. Skullface believed that language was the ultimate tool of oppression, the means by which dominant cultures erased minority identities and imposed their worldviews on conquered peoples. His own tragic history supported this belief. He had lost his native Hungarian tongue, his cultural identity, and his personal past to the forces of European imperialism. The boarding schools that attempted to civilize colonized children, the industrial complexes that exploited native labor, the wars that destroyed traditional ways of life, all of these relied on language as a weapon of cultural domination. The vocal cord parasites represented Skullface's answer to linguistic imperialism. If language served as a tool of oppression, then he would create a biological weapon that turned language into a death sentence. English, the lingua franca of international business and military operations, would become a plague that killed anyone who spoke it. This would level the playing field, destroy the advantage that English speakers enjoyed, and potentially shatter the systems of global power that relied on shared language for coordination and control. Quiet existed as the living embodiment of this philosophy taken to its logical extreme. She literally could not speak English without killing everyone around her and herself. Language had become weaponized within her body, transformed from a tool of communication into an instrument of death. But unlike Skullface, who embraced this transformation and sought to inflict it on the world, Quiet rejected it. She chose silence not because she agreed with Skullface's philosophy, but because she disagreed with it so fundamentally that she refused to become the weapon he had designed her to be. Her silence was therefore both practical necessity and philosophical statement. On a practical level, not speaking English prevented the parasites from activating and protected those around her. But on a philosophical level, choosing silence was a rejection of Skullface's entire worldview. By refusing to speak, Quiet was asserting that language wasn't inherently a tool of oppression. Communication mattered. Expressing yourself mattered. Being unable to do so was a loss, not a liberation. She would have spoken if she could have done so safely. Her silence was sacrifice, not celebration. This nuanced treatment of language and silence distinguished Quiet from being a simple fan service character or a shallow plot device. Her character design, the minimal clothing, the sexual presentation, the male gaze-oriented animations, could have been just exploitation. Another example of video game industry's problematic treatment of women. And for many critics, those elements overshadowed everything else about her character. But underneath that controversial presentation existed substantive characterization built around meaningful themes explored with genuine depth. The controversy around Quiet's design became part of her narrative in meta ways that Kojima deliberately cultivated. He had famously stated that players would feel ashamed of their words and deeds once they understood the reason for Quiet's appearance. This statement drew mockery when the in-game explanation, that she breathes through her skin, seemed like transparent rationalization for a sexualized character design. But that mockery perhaps missed how the controversy itself reinforced the game's themes. Quiet couldn't explain herself, she couldn't defend her choices or justify her appearance. She had to endure judgment and criticism without being able to respond. People who saw her made assumptions based on limited information and visual cues rather than understanding her full situation. In this way, the meta-conversation around Quiet paralleled her in-universe experience. Just as Diamond Dog's personnel initially misjudged her based on her appearance and silence, so too did players and critics judge her character based on design choices without necessarily engaging with the deeper narrative being told. Whether this was intentional on Kojima's part or convenient post-hoc rationalization remains debatable. But the parallel exists regardless of its origins, and it adds additional dimension to how we understand Quiet as a character. She represents the limitations of judgment based on surface appearances, the importance of understanding someone's full context before condemning them, and the tragedy of being unable to advocate for yourself when others make assumptions about your motivations and character. The theme of revenge also ran strongly through Quiet's story. Skullface's entire plan was driven by desire for revenge against those who had wronged him. He sought revenge against Major Zero and Cypher for perceived betrayals. He sought revenge against English speakers for the linguistic imperialism that had destroyed his identity. He sought revenge against Big Boss for surviving when Skullface had suffered. His life had become consumed by vengeance, narrowing his existence to nothing but elaborate plans for causing pain to those he blamed for his own trauma. Quiet had every reason to share Skullface's desire for revenge. She had been burned alive, transformed into a monster, infected with parasites, and deployed as a suicide weapon against people who had never personally wronged her. If anyone deserved to feel anger about their treatment, surely Quiet qualified. But she chose a different path. When given the opportunity for revenge, when she was captured by Diamond Dogs and could have spoken English immediately to trigger the parasites and destroy them all, she chose protection instead. When she developed feelings for Snake, despite him being partially responsible for her transformation, she embraced those feelings rather than using them as justification for betrayal. This rejection of revenge distinguished Quiet from Skullface and many other characters in Metal Gear's universe. The series had always explored cycles of revenge and how violence begets more violence. Big Boss himself had transformed from hero to villain, partly through his own desire for revenge against those who had wronged him. Quiet represented an alternative, someone who suffered immensely but chose not to perpetuate the cycle, who found purpose in protection rather than destruction, who turned potential for revenge into motivation for sacrifice. The theme of phantom pain, which gave the game its subtitle, manifested powerfully in Quiet's story. Venom Snake himself was a phantom, a body double who believed he was Big Boss, while the real Big Boss built outer heaven elsewhere. His pain was phantom pain, the suffering of an amputated limb that no longer exists, the ache of something that was never really his, but feels like a part of him nonetheless. When Quiet left Diamond Dogs, she became Snake's phantom pain, an absence that haunted him precisely because of how present she had been before. But Quiet experienced her own phantom pain in more literal ways. She had lost her voice, or rather, had been forced to silence it through circumstances beyond her control. The loss wasn't physical in the same way as Snake's lost arm, but it was just as debilitating. She carried the phantom of speech, the muscle memory of forming words, the impulse to respond verbally that she had to constantly suppress. Every moment she remained silent was a moment she felt the absence of her voice, the phantom pain of an ability she still possessed but could never safely use. Her story also explored what it means to be human when your biology has been radically modified. Quiet still thought, felt, and experienced emotions in recognizably human ways, but her body functioned according to rules that had nothing to do with normal human biology. She photosynthesized like a plant. She breathed through her skin like an amphibian. She hosted parasitic organisms that granted her superhuman abilities while threatening to kill everyone she cared about. Was she still human? Had the parasites transformed her into something else? Did the distinction even matter if she still experienced the world through a recognizably human consciousness? The game left these questions deliberately ambiguous, refusing to provide easy answers. Quiet was treated as human by Snake and most Diamond Dogs personnel, but she was also obviously not normal by any conventional standard. Her humanity was a matter of choice and recognition rather than biology. She was human because she chose to act humanely, because others recognized her humanity despite her modifications, and because she experienced suffering and joy in ways that resonated with human experience regardless of the mechanical differences in how her body functioned. This treatment of posthuman existence added depth to the Metal Gear series' ongoing exploration of how technology affects human identity. The series had always asked questions about whether artificial intelligences could be truly alive, whether genetic engineering could create something that should be considered human, whether cybernetic enhancements fundamentally altered personhood. Quiet represented another data point in this exploration, showing someone whose biological modifications were extreme, but whose essential humanity remained intact precisely because humanity was never purely biological to begin with. The tragic irony of Quiet's situation was that Skullface's modifications made her more effective as a soldier, but less able to connect with others as a person. Her superhuman abilities were remarkable, but they came at the cost of normal human interaction. She couldn't speak, couldn't eat meals with others, couldn't participate in the thousand small social rituals that bind communities together. She was simultaneously more capable and more isolated, stronger and lonelier, enhanced and diminished. This paradox defined her existence within Diamond Dogs, making her invaluable in combat but perpetually separated from full social integration. Her relationship with Snake provided partial remedy to this isolation, but it also highlighted her limitations. Their bond was deep and genuine, but it remained constrained by her inability to speak. They couldn't have normal conversations. She couldn't tell him about her thoughts, fears, hopes, or memories. Their communication happened through glances, gestures, and shared experiences, rather than through the dialogue that typically forms the foundation of human relationships. In some ways, this made their connection more pure. It wasn't based on words that could mislead or promises that might be broken, but on demonstrated actions and mutual understanding. But it was also incomplete, limited by the fundamental barrier of her enforced silence. The cassette tape Quiet left for Snake when she departed represented her attempt to overcome this limitation. Unable to speak to him directly, unable to explain her reasons for leaving or express her feelings in words, she gave him the only vocal expression she could safely offer, humming, wordless melody that communicated emotion without language. It was a gift of intimacy from someone who had been denied the usual means of intimate expression. The fact that Snake kept this tape and listened to it repeatedly demonstrated how much he valued even this limited communication, this fragment of Quiet's voice that was all she could safely share with him. The moral questions surrounding Quiet's treatment by Diamond Dogs also deserve examination. Was it ethical to allow her to remain on Mother Base knowing she carried the English parasites? Did they have the right to risk everyone's lives for the sake of one person's rehabilitation, no matter how valuable she proved to be? Miller's arguments against keeping her were rooted in legitimate concerns about collective safety versus individual mercy. From a utilitarian perspective, executing Quiet, or at minimum permanently exiling her, would have been the most rational choice to protect the greatest number of people. But the game ultimately sided with Snake and Ocelot's more compassionate approach, suggesting that strict utilitarian calculus fails to account for important aspects of human experience. Quiet deserved the chance to prove herself, to transcend her origins as a weapon and become something better. The risks of giving her that chance were real, but so were the potential rewards, not just her contributions as an operative, but the moral victory represented by rehabilitation rather than elimination, redemption rather than revenge, trust rather than fear. Diamond Dogs taking in Quiet was as much about who they wanted to be as an organization as it was about her capabilities. That said, the game didn't pretend this choice came without costs. Keeping Quiet on Mother Base did create ongoing risks. Her departure at the end, though motivated by sacrifice rather than betrayal, still left a hole in Diamond Dog's operations and demonstrated that the concerns about her long-term stability had some validity. The story validated both Miller's caution and Snake's mercy, suggesting that complex situations often don't have clearly correct answers, but rather require judgment calls that balance competing legitimate concerns. The relationship between Quiet and Code Talker added another dimension to understanding her character. Code Talker was the only person on Mother Base who Quiet could speak with safely, since he conversed in Navajo and the parasites didn't target that language. Their interactions revealed that Quiet did have thoughts, opinions, and explanations for her behavior. She simply couldn't share them with most people. Code Talker served as her translator and confidant, the bridge between her silence and the need others had to understand her motivations. But Code Talker's presence also highlighted the arbitrary cruelty of Quiet's situation. She could speak Navajo, could communicate fully in that language, yet that didn't help her interact with the primarily English-speaking Diamond Dogs personnel. The parasite's specificity to particular languages meant that Quiet had the capacity for speech, but not for useful speech in her context. It was like being given the ability to play music, but only on an instrument no one around you could hear. The ability existed, but remained functionally useless, another layer of isolation built into her condition. The fate of vocal cord parasites more broadly in the game's universe raised questions about whether Quiet could have been cured. Code Talker had developed Wolbachia treatments that sterilized parasites by converting male specimens to female. This cure worked for the Kikongo strain and other language-targeting parasites. Theoretically, it could have worked for Quiet's English strain as well, but the cure came with a significant cost: permanent infertility. And more importantly, curing Quiet's English strain might have interfered with the different parasitic organisms that were keeping her alive. The one that covers strain that enabled her superhuman abilities and cutaneous respiration. The game never fully explored whether curing Quiet was possible, leaving this as an unresolved thread that added to the tragedy of her story. Was there a potential solution that Diamond Dogs never discovered? Could Quiet have been permanently freed from the English parasites if they had invested more research into the problem? Or was her condition fundamentally incurable, with the parasites too integrated into her biology to remove without killing her? The ambiguity meant that Quiet's sacrifice might have been either necessary or avoidable, with no way to know which was true. In retrospect, Quiet's character served as one of Metal Gear Solid 5's most sophisticated narrative elements, even if her execution remained controversial due to design choices that many found gratuitous. She embodied the game's themes about language, revenge, identity, and the cost of warfare. She demonstrated how people could be transformed by trauma yet still retain their essential humanity. She showed that redemption was possible even for those created specifically as weapons. And she illustrated how sacrifice could come not from grand dramatic gestures, but from the daily choice to remain silent, to endure isolation, to suppress one's own needs for the benefit of others. Her legacy within the Metal Gear series is complicated by the controversy around her design. For every analysis that treats Quiet as a substantive character with important thematic resonance, there exists counter-analysis pointing out that none of this depth excuses or justifies the male-gaze cinematography and gratuitous sexualization of a character whose backstory actively condemned such treatment. This tension between appreciation of Quiet's narrative role and criticism of her visual presentation remains unresolved, perhaps deliberately so on Kojima's part. What seems clear is that Quiet represented something meaningful to many players, regardless of their views on her controversial design. She was memorable not just for her appearance, but for her actions, her choices, and her ultimate sacrifice. The phantom pain of her absence at the game's conclusion hit hard because she had proven herself worthy of care and protection, making her departure genuinely tragic rather than merely plot necessary. She mattered to players because she mattered to Snake, and both of them mattered within the larger narrative about how violence perpetuates itself and how people struggle to break free from cycles of revenge. The game allowed players to eventually unlock a reunion with Quiet by repeatedly replaying Mission 11, cloaked in silence, until a special reunion version appeared. This feature acknowledged that some players wanted the gameplay benefits of having Quiet as a buddy, even after completing her story arc. But it also felt somewhat hollow narratively, since it undermined the permanence and weight of her sacrifice. Bringing Quiet back reduced a quiet exit from a poignant ending to a temporary inconvenience, which many argued diminished the impact of what Kojima had constructed. This design decision reflected broader tensions in how games balance narrative and gameplay considerations. Quiet was too popular and too useful to permanently remove from the game, but keeping her available diminished the emotional impact of her departure. The reunion feature tried to split the difference, making her accessible without retconning her exit, but satisfied neither those who wanted her story to end definitively nor those who wanted her integrated permanently. It was a compromise that highlighted how difficult it can be to serve both storytelling and game design goals simultaneously. Ultimately, Quiet's story in Metal Gear Solid 5 stands as a meditation on sacrifice, silence, and the cost of doing what you believe is right, even when you can't explain your choices to others. She began as a weapon designed to kill, transformed through unlikely circumstances into a protector willing to die for those she had been created to destroy. Her silence wasn't weakness, but extraordinary strength, the constant discipline required to suppress the most basic human impulse, to speak, to communicate, to connect through language. And her sacrifice wasn't a single dramatic moment, but a continuous choice made over months. Every day choosing others' safety over her own voice, until the day she finally chose one specific person's life over everything else. In a series known for its complex characters and sophisticated storytelling, Quiet represented one of Metal Gear's most ambitious attempts at creating a character whose entire arc depended on remaining silent. She proved that you don't need extensive dialogue or lengthy monologues to create a powerful, memorable character. Actions speak, and silence can communicate volumes when deployed with intention and backed by substantive character development. Quiet's story deserves to be remembered not just for the controversy around her design, but for what she represented: a warrior who became a guardian, a weapon who chose protection, and a silent angel watching over a phantom who carried pain for a man he wasn't, but chose to become. The legend of Tixage, the quiet one who haunted the mountains of Afghanistan, persists in the myths of those who witnessed her actions. Soviet soldiers who survived encounters with her told stories of an invisible demon who struck without warning. Afghan civilians spoke of a guardian angel who protected them from invaders. Diamond Dog's personnel remembered her as a valued comrade who gave everything to save their commander. And Snake himself carried her memory, her humming, her sacrifice, as one more phantom pain to add to all the others. A reminder of what had been lost, what could never be recovered, and what had mattered precisely because its absence hurt so deeply. Thank you for joining us on this comprehensive exploration of Quiet's story in Metal Gear Solid 5: The Phantom Pain. If you enjoyed this deep dive into one of gaming's most controversial and complex characters, please like this video and subscribe to Lore Save Point for more extensive lore analyses of your favorite games. And remember, sometimes the most powerful stories are told not through words, but through silence.